So I'm gonna get started. So again, hello everyone. My name is Rula Bashour and I work as the project manager for the Transforming Higher Education project. It's a collaboration between the American University of Beirut, the Global Confederation for Higher Education Association of Agriculture and Life Sciences, GECHERA, Earth University, the WK Kellogg Foundation, and this collaboration is to transform higher education in selected university in Mexico, Haiti, and also to advocate for university change across the GECHERA network of higher education association. As part of our project, we have started a series of webinars, and together with the Asian Pacific Association for Agriculture Research Institution, APARI, that most of you maybe know already, we are hosting this webinar today titled Experiential Learning in Times of COVID-19. Where do we go from here? So the objective of this webinar is to share and discuss the challenges and innovative applications of experiential learning during a pandemic such as COVID-19, and to talk about how we are delivering experiential learning and how we continue to involve and engage our students in a way that fits this new virtual learning, which is dominating the world now. So we'll discuss if that worked, it did not work, what we have learned from different experiences from universities across the world, and what are the innovative ways of addressing this. I would also like to welcome participants from our project partner, from the pilot universities in Mexico and Haiti, and the GECHERA Association, from APARI's network as well, and all the institutions around the world that joined us today. As I mentioned, we have about 160 participants from 21 countries and 43 institutions. I would also like to welcome our speakers from Canada, USA, Philippines, and we will be introducing them shortly. I would also like to welcome Martina Spisiakova from APARI, who will be helping us today with the moderation of this webinar. Martina, maybe you would like to say a few words on behalf of APARI. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Raula. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. On behalf of APARI, I would like to welcome all of you to this webinar, which is organized in collaboration between GECHERA, American University of Beirut, Earth University, Kellogg Foundation, and APARI. So as we know, the COVID-19 pandemic made a tremendous impact worldwide, forcing all of us to adapt and make transition towards online meetings and learning. Higher education institutions are not an exception, as you all know. And since the beginning of the pandemic, you all have probably heard many complaints about having to change and adapt, which actually tends to be more intense in more conservative public education environments with more resistance to change, which we have all seen. But increasingly, we are recognizing that the pandemic has actually brought adjustments to teaching, learning, research, and engagement, and actually taught us new, more creative and innovative ways of delivering higher education. Experiential learning in virtual environment is one of them. For your information, APARI has recently been producing 2 important knowledge outputs, which I would like to highlight very quickly. In collaboration with IFPRI, we have just published a regional synthesis report on research investments in Southeast Asia in the context of Agriculture, Science and Technology Indicators Project. It's called ASTI. And this report shows that Southeast Asian agriculture research investment is too low to support future needs. But this is not just in Southeast Asia, but we can see that all over Asia and the Pacific, but also other regions. So the region will really need to step up to its investment in agriculture R&D to enhance future agricultural productivity, food security, and poverty reduction, as well as to respond more effectively to challenges which are posed by climate change and environmental degradation. So universities, all of you, are playing a very crucial role in this process through education and research. But APARI is currently also conducting an assessment of capacity development to strengthen agriculture innovation systems in Asia. This is in partnership with FAO and APIRAS, which is a forum for rural advisory services. And what this assessment is teaching us is that research is really a top priority of almost all universities in Asia. But not just that. While there is a joy in research for research's sake, it is absolutely critical that we understand the context of our work. If we don't, we will never get beyond the lab. And this is why experiential learning, combined with community interactions and learning about the environment in which we live, in which people around us live, be it face-to-face or virtual, it's really important. So this webinar will provide some interesting examples from all over the world, how different universities have applied experiential learning during this pandemic. And there are a lot of lessons that will hopefully inspire you to take your own steps towards transformation of higher education in your university and in your country. So let us all enjoy this opportunity, and I am personally very much looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina, and thank you also for APARI for their active role also in promoting the transformation of higher education. Just for those of you who don't know about Transforming Higher Education project, I want to let you know that it actually aims at introducing key elements of success in higher education, namely experiential learning, community engagement with the universities, social entrepreneurship, ethical and value-based leadership, and last, conflict resolution through dialogue. We have started a series of webinars on each of these key elements of success, and today we are addressing experiential learning in times of COVID-19. The webinar will last about 90 minutes, and we have 4 panelists, and we will be introducing each one of them shortly. They will have a short presentation, and then we have time for discussions and questions and comments at the end. As you may have noticed, as participants, your microphone and video are turned off, and this is due to the large number of participants we have. So it's only enabled for presenters and speakers. You can use the chat box to ask any questions or send your comments, and we will be collating the questions at the end. So now I'm going to introduce our moderator for today, Professor Michel Wathieu. Professor Wathieu grew up on a dairy farm in Belgium, and he was a first-generation college student in his family. Then he came to the US in '85 to complete his PhD in ruminant nutrition at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. 10 years of international dairy extension work. Then he took a position at the Department of Dairy Sciences at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he remains to date. He had received numerous teaching awards, not only from his university, but also from the state of Wisconsin, from professional societies such as the American Dairy Science Association and the North American College and Teachers of Agriculture, and from the USDA as well. He had gained an international reputation as an educator because of his dedication and his passion to empower students through critical thinking. Professor Wathieu is a trilingual, and he has published technical dairy guides and has been translated in 8 languages, and he's been active in many international countries. He's currently teaching 4 courses, including a 2-week program in Mexico and a course for PhD candidates interested in exploring effective teaching in internationally diverse college classroom. Michel, thank you for accepting to be our moderator for this webinar, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rula, for this, for this nice introduction, and thank you for the invitation to help moderate this session. I'm really honored, and I'll do my best to moderate the webinar sessions and stimulate the questions and hear the remarks of our speaker. I'm looking forward to comments and questions coming from the audience, and hopefully we can address as many of them as possible. And without any further ado, to save the time for the speakers in the question, I think we should go ahead. Gurula, the floor is back to you.
Actually, Martina, are you going to introduce Frank? Frank, can you hear us now? You can start? Okay. Martina, you want to introduce Dr. Frank? Looks like Martina is having issues. So I will go ahead. So our next speaker is Professor Frank Robinson from the University of Alberta in Canada.
Yeah, sorry. I think I lost my internet connection. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Okay. So I was introducing Dr. Frank. So I started by saying he's a professor from the University of Alberta in Canada.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay, I'm going to mute Martina and continue to talk about Frank. He's going to introduce today, he's going to share with us student perception of online learning during COVID-19. Dr. Robinson has been a professor of poultry production and physiology at the University of Alberta since 1986. He has a BS in agriculture from the University of Saskatchewan, and poultry science, MS in poultry science from Virginia Tech, and a PhD in animal reproduction from University of Guelph. He has over 20 years of experience, and he's been active in researching reproductive efficiency of female broiler breeders. He had taught in areas of poultry science and general animal agriculture with emphasis on inquiry-based learning. He continues to teach involving experiential learning in introductory animal science class, and that he has taught over 40 times. And he was inducted into Alberta Agriculture Hall of Fame in 2006. He is a 3M National Teaching Fellow. Dr. Frank, please, the floor is yours. You're muted, Frank. I'm going to unmute you.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to share your screen, please.
Can you see that yet?
Not yet. We don't see your screen yet.
Can you see it now?
Yes, if you can put it in full screen, it will be better.
Okay. Sorry about all the technical difficulties getting on. I'm very happy to be here. So what I want to talk about today is a study we did last summer, right after the students finished up their term from the transition to the online learning due to COVID. So what we did was, and our objective for doing this was to try and do a better job the next time around. So we really wanted to find out how students did. So we sent an email out to about 1,000 students, 1,039 that were taking classes in our faculty last spring. And then we gave them 2 weeks to do the survey, and we had a response rate of about 42%. So that was a pretty good response rate, which we thought told us that students actually were quite keen on telling us what they had to say. So just to give you a bit of a background on what we got, we had these 432 responses, pretty much covered our scope of our 4.5-year program. So we had students from all years. We also had students from all of our different faculty, our different programs in the faculty showing up, everything from business management to environmental sciences and forestry, human ecology, animal science, animal health, agriculture, and nutrition and food science, and environmental sciences. So we had a pretty good cross-section, roughly proportional to what our enrollment is. So one of the things we asked them was, what was your preferred mode of instruction during that winter term? And it was pretty much a continuous, even split between asynchronous and synchronous. So in that case, we didn't really say that one was any better than the other. And the students really seemed quite polarized about which one they liked best. We asked them quite a few questions that were open-ended answers. And one of the questions we asked them was, what did you like about recorded lectures? Now, in answering this question, it was pretty clear they were talking about both synchronous and asynchronous lectures that were recorded. And the main reason they liked it was so they could watch it on their own time and manage family schedules. Because a lot of these students were now at home, and things like childcare and other siblings and that were an issue. They also liked it so they could rewatch it and rewind it and do it again. But it also happened poor internet connectivity. A lot of our students were probably gone back to rural areas, and high-speed internet it's actually not that great in some places. We had a few students, we had a disproportionately low number of international students respond, but the 2 students did say it helped with time zones, and after this morning, I think we all have an appreciation for that. So the advantages of synchronous learning, they really thought that it helped them be motivated. We're going to hear later on in this presentation that motivation is really a big deal for online learning for students last term. They also found it was easier to ask questions and build community. And building community is something that students really seem to value. So well, we also then asked them, what do you think went well in the whole thing? Because we shut down classes for 2 days and then we started up again right away in online mode, and very few of our classes were online learning. So the most common thing was they thought the professors were helpful and empathetic. So that meant that they appreciated the fact that profs were trying to help. Some people thought the course materials were good. They liked the asynchronous delivery because helping fit with their schedules. We also made some accommodations that we don't normally do, and that was to help students adjust. We changed the syllabus. They liked that. Some students thought everything went well. There was less pressure with open book exams because we did go to open book exams largely. And we said that asynchronous delivery helped with rewatching lectures, and they really liked the Zoom lectures. So what didn't go well? Well, some students said there was no problem. So this sort of goes along with them saying that everything went well. The biggest thing was the confusion, lack of clarity. And so professors, no question, were confused. They had 2 days to get their courses online. They had to communicate that to students most of them had never taken an online class. So it's pretty obvious there was confusion. The big problem was staying engaged, and we'll hear about this later on as well. And some people had some pretty negative comments to say about individual instructors. They said that exams were made too difficult because some students felt that exams were made to be more challenging because they were open book. Group work was really a problem, I think, and we saw this a couple of places that students had difficulty connecting with their peers for projects. And this is the time of the term when most of the project work would be happening. Some students had hardware and internet issues. Poor communication shows up again, and missed lab content because most of the labs were just canceled. We asked them what were the biggest challenges they faced in finishing up the term. The biggest one, again, was motivation. And this is probably about a third of the students that we surveyed said that motivation, engagement, and focus was the problem. And this is actually quite a big deal, I think, because we need to really look at finding ways of having students go from just being totally passive in an online class to actually taking charge and getting involved, asking questions, and as they would in a regular online class. They also said that there was poor quality delivery of some materials, and this was somewhat to be expected because it was put together pretty fast. Some students said they had no place at home to work, and some students actually commented that they were sharing computers with other roommates and siblings. So that was not surprising as well. Hardware and software issues. A lot of students had never used Zoom, didn't have Skype, had to get those and get organized on it, learn how to use it. And also, some of our exams went with pretty significant exam validation software that was really kind of difficult for some students to get into. Communication shows up again with professors as well as with peers. We asked them what resources they thought were lacking to complete their courses, and the biggest one was library access. And so this included a few things. I went through these comments again yesterday, and the comments included things like access to collections, but also included study spaces and computer labs and that as well. So they missed having that resource. Internet issues were also very big, and then some of the smaller ones were workspace and computer equipment. So because we told them in July that we'd be going to mostly online learning again in the fall, we said, how confident are you think the fall is going to work? And it was pretty much an even split again between confident and not confident. So it was encouraging to me that almost half of the students were very confident or confident because that told me that we weren't starting from where we were probably starting from in March of this year. When we asked them why they weren't confident, some of them said that online learning just wasn't their thing, and they didn't like it, and there was all kinds of comments in there about motivation and feeling not connected and not being able to ask profs questions, not being able to feed off other students' questions. Because in that last term, most of the courses are delivered pretty much without any breakout rooms for discussions or that. It was pretty much just trying to get the content out. There's a lot of uncertainty about how it would go, and students were really concerned about labs and group projects. And this is something that I think we have to really think about when we have, science-based programs with labs. We're going through that now with our organic chemistry classes, where there's not enough lab spaces for students, and so some of our accredited programs are actually running into problems with labs this next year as well. Students also missed the social aspects of campus and networking, and some of them thought that the course quality was just going to be poor, and they were pretty, they weren't very positive at all. Some students, again, had bad home and family situations for being conducive to working. Some students thought the profs wouldn't be engaged, and it's difficult to ask questions. And then one of the things that showed up a few places was that profs had unrealistically high expectations. And it's interesting because when we talked to some of the professors, they actually tried to lower the expectations by changing the syllabus to say, well, instead of having all these lab assignments, we'll make something that'll be easier to handle. So that's one that has surprised a few professors that have told me that. We asked them, what advice would you have if you wanted to say something to your professors that would enhance this fall term? They really said some said use synchronous lectures, and you'll see down below here that some said use asynchronous lectures. So again, they were kind of split, but more seemed to like the synchronous lectures, presumably for the engagement factor with professors. They want them recorded. They want them to be considerate and accommodating and flexible. And this is something that showed up a few times that students said, we're going through a tough time here. We want you to recognize that and maybe cut us some slack. They wanted places for students to ask questions in forums or chat rooms. They really wanted communication. This is something that showed up a few places in the survey, that they wanted more focus on term work and not just on final exams. They wanted you to be organized and prepared and minimize group work. Group work was really a problem. So this is something that we've had to kind of think about for the current semester as well. So we also said, like, what do you want them to know about the fall? And they said, again, we're stressed out, anxious, be patient, flexible, and kind. This is something that, professors usually try and be all of those things. But in an online situation, it's maybe harder to get that emotion across and that feeling across. And so students really wanted that to be demonstrated. 38 students said really positive, encouraging things to professors, like, you're doing a good job, hang in there. We know it's hard for you too. And those were actually really interesting to read, because some students wrote quite long comments, saying that they did appreciate what we were doing. They said to be engaged, do a good job. Then to remember that students have different resources, and things like time zones showed up again there. Communicate, do a good job handling exams. Students again said we're concerned about labs and group work, and then post-recorded lectures. So that was just a fast spin through the project. We have a lot more data than that, but I reduced it just so I wouldn't go over time. But that's the kind of thing we have done. I'm actually preparing this manuscript for publication, so hopefully you'll see it very soon. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Frank, for this presentation, full of very interesting information. So I would like to ask you a couple of questions, and starting with the feedback you got earlier, that seems to be very split between students who seems to prefer the asynchronous relative to the synchronous delivery of the material in the spring. But it seems that when later on you asked the questions of what would you like to see in the fall, that there was a much larger group of students who would rather go with the synchronous rather than the asynchronous. So my question to you is, from a learning perspective, what do you think would be most favorable as we move forward into the future here? Try to design more and more of our classes as synchronous or asynchronous?
That's a really good question. So it's a pretty relevant question for me, because I'm teaching next term. Mm-hmm. And so I've thought a lot about what I want to do. And I'm going to go synchronous for sure, mainly because I want to have students look at the whites of my eyes and see what I'm thinking and saying, and how to be able to ask the question. I want to develop a community. So I think the synchronous is important for building community. And in my class, I have 150 students with labs 3 days a week. So 50 students a lab, I think that's too many. So I'm actually splitting that group of 50 into two cohorts of 25, and having them each for an hour and a half instead of having all 50 for 3 hours, so that we can try and get them to turn their cameras on, build a sense of community, and so that they can't say that we were not connected. So that's why I think they like the synchronous. When we asked the question about asynchronous and synchronous, which they like better, some students, I think, interpreted that as recorded. And they clearly like the recorded lectures. So I think that question confused them a bit, because if you could record a synchronous lecture, it gives them the best of both worlds, I think, too.
Yes. Excellent. Very good. So I'm a little bit of a timekeeper here. I think should we be moving to the next speaker, Willa?
Yes, let's start with that. Then we can have discussions later at the end.
Okay.
Martina.
Thank you very much, Frank.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. So the second panelist is Dr. Majdi Nach from UC Davis. He's a faculty member at the Department of Land, Air, and Water Resources at the University of California, Davis, and he studies the dominant physical and biogeochemical processes controlling the flow of water, carbon, and nutrients across the soil, plant, atmosphere system, as well as the impact of addition and sustainability of these resources. Dr. Nach recognizes the complex interactions between these resources and the need for integrated approaches to develop sustainable solutions. He seeks to develop decision support tools for optimum resource management that promote economic progress, social inclusion, as well as environmental sustainability. He is particularly interested in developing low-cost and sustainable solutions for poverty alleviation. His fundamental research resulted in the development of new experimental and theoretical models for characterizing cracks and preferential flows in soils, for abstracting the soil's pore structure, and for advancing the modeling of infiltration, flow, and transport across scales. Dr. Majdi will be presenting COVID-19 as a nudge for an educational overhaul. Please, Dr. Majdi, the floor is yours.
Majdi, we're not hearing you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Can you share your screen, please?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to do.
At the bottom, the third bottom says share.
It's loading now, so it will be ready in a minute.
Okay.
So in the meantime, I'll try to provide some context. So it's great that I'm following Frank's very holistic and macroscopic studies. So I'm now going to focus on my own personal experience, and I teach two courses that have lab components in them, one in environmental sensing and the other in soil physics, and I will be sharing my perspectives and the lessons that I learned from that experience. As soon as WebEx allows me to share my screen.
Do you want me to share it from my side, and maybe?
It is loading. Maybe I should have just shared the screen, not share a file, because it's now loading a file. Can I cancel that? Stop.
Yeah, you can just stop sharing, and then you can.
Okay. So that's one of the first problems. There are so many tools now, and apparently I'm not used to WebEx. We use Zoom at UC Davis. So here you go. That's one of the first problems that we can talk about.
Okay, it's starting. We see you.
It's starting?
Yeah. You see that your PowerPoint is not responding.
I'm sorry for that. Okay. Yeah, Rula, okay, I'm going to stop the sharing and just share my screen, and that would be the easiest. Otherwise, because you cannot stop me from sharing, right? Share my screen. Let's see.
We see your screen. Yeah.
You see my screen?
Yeah. You have a folder open or something.
Okay. Okay, Rola, please, if you can share my, you have my presentation. That would be the best.
Yes, I have it in PDF, and I'm gonna do that now. You see it, everyone?
Yes.
Okay. So you tell me when you want me to move.
Yeah. So the first 3 slides are going to be very quick. So hello everyone. I chose the title of COVID-19 as a nudge for an educational overhaul because I wanted us to all think positively from this experience. The shock has happened. We all passed through our tortuous path from denial all the way to acceptance, and we are now at a stage where we're thinking, how can we make the best out of this? And I'll tell you from my personal experience, there are things that I've done following the pandemic that are going to stay in my teaching methods even after when we're done with COVID-19. So this is not just nagging about all the bad things that happened with COVID, but rather what are the good things that improve the quality of my education, and what are the things that I would think of as permanent changes to my teaching program, and I hope would be permanent changes to teaching as a whole. If you can move to the next slide, please. So think about all the inconveniences that COVID-19 created. Next, the projects that COVID-19 impacted, and all the chaos that COVID-19 brought. And guess what? We're not going to talk about any of this today. All of us, at least me, have passed through this tortuous path of denial. Around mid-February, I had this COVID-19 cannot stop my teaching the class, and this can't be happening to me. And then, you move to the anger phase where, why me? Why do I have to pass through this? And then you start bargaining. Maybe I should take a sabbatical this quarter, and everything will be fine in a few months, and then I can start teaching back again. And then you go into a depression phase. This is so overwhelming. I am actually teaching 2 hard courses to transform to an online environment. So what would happen to academia? How can lab courses be taught if we cannot go back to school very soon? And then finally you accept. So that would be the next. And you can say, well, I think it's going to be okay, I can do it. And then you get motivated by others because you see others, the doctors, the daily workers, the people who cannot but go out and interact and say, well, this is me just doing my own personal share of this. So I will do it, and I will do it well. And all this happened in a very fast pace. So this thing, in my case, did not take more than 2 weeks. Obviously, there were many times where you would go back 2-3 stages and then push yourself again into acceptance at the end. But at that point, around end of February, as a department, we came all together to the conclusion that we are going to be teaching online all the courses, and we started doing meetings twice a week. All the faculty meeting twice a week. I remember it was, I think, Wednesdays and Fridays, and we would start exchange best practices. To do this, you have to do that, because I have no idea how to make a video. Zoom was a new word for me. And we had to learn very quickly and get used to a whole new reality. Can you go to the next slide, please? So here are my challenges. I teach those two courses. ESM 108 is an environmental monitoring course. This is as practical and as hands-on and experiential as it can get. I teach basic electronics and environmental sensing, hands-on experiential learning with basic measurement technologies and methods, how to build sensors using Arduinos, and introducing the main environmental and ecological sensors and data loggers. On the other side, and that's what I'm teaching now, I teach soil physics, and this is the basic soil physical concepts, hands-on experiential learning with basic soil physical methods, fundamental physical concepts, and then performing field experiments to extract basic soil physical parameters, and building also hands-on computer literacy. So you can see how this became a challenge, or seems to be a challenge. What I started with first is complete course restructure. And here are some of the things that we started to do. What you see on the screen as the photo, that's our teaching platform. We use Canvas. I know at AUB we used to use Moodle, so there are other software that are there, but they're pretty much the same and similar. So I moved from dividing my course material into 2 or 3 main sections, and that's what we're used to. So you have either a midterm and the final, or 2 exams and the final. Usually you have big chunks of material clustered together. So I moved into smaller and independent educational modules. I tried to make every module have a maximum of 10 to 15% of the grade. I replaced firm deadlines with flexible guidelines. So instead of saying the deadline for homework 5 is November 17, I would say I would love to see 5 homeworks turned down by November 20 or something like that. And then I created lots of redundancies. So for example, choose 7 out of 8, grade out of 105 instead of 100, and things like that. Next slide, please. Also, all lab demos were converted into videos and detailed step-by-step processes for course content. All demos were discussed in lab, and their installation, wiring, calibrations, and everything. They were built in front of the students during those virtual labs. Next. And I made videos, lots and lots and lots of them. And to the question of going synchronous versus asynchronous, I would say what I ended up landing on is a hybrid of both. So I now have videos that are individually made for the main concepts in my courses, and those are the parts that will continue post-COVID, because you cannot leave videos with students in them and teach them from one semester to the other for privacy and for different considerations. And that's one of the things that I learned. For electronics, I found its tool called Tinkercad, and that's basically an online simulator. Basically, I introduced electronics and circuitry to a whole group of students who did not take even a single electricity course before. And we did that through an online simulator where you can actually, next slide please, you can build circuits in there, have problems in them, and ask students, why is this circuit not connecting? Why is this LED light not turning on? And there's a very nice feature on Zoom which actually allows you to provide access to students. So students can actually use their mouse to access your own screen and change the wiring in those circuits. And this will basically allow them to have the experience that is as similar as possible to you being in the lab and giving them those experiences. Next slide, please. Last look at what is currently happening now. So my biggest challenge with my soil physics course is the experiments that I wanted to do, and those are typically lab experiments. And I definitely had the main constraint that I cannot bring the students to the lab. So I thought, why not take the lab to the students? So I did some shopping for some basic material like syringes, tubes, cups. That circle that you see there is basically a cake cutter, and I'm going to use that for field infiltration experiments where students are going to insert it in the soil, and using those marked cups will put equal quantities of water to measure the infiltration rate. So these are some of the things that are taking place now. Those bags are the bags that were either shipped to the students, or the students came and collected them from the university on pre-approved pickup dates. Next slide, please. Okay, very general and very quick. So for educators, these are some quick advice. Obviously, we all know that students are under huge stress. We all need to show flexibility and consider inclusive methods. There is no one-size-fits-all magic solutions. And I tell you, what works for me will not work for others. It takes more time, and this is a fact, and we have to live with it. And this one actually applies to everyone. Teaching online does take more time than going to teach in a class. Think outside the box. So again, the lab experience taught me that exchanging ideas with colleagues was really fundamental and important. There are so many things that I learned that I have full appreciation and thanks to my colleagues. I would have never been able to do it myself. So doing those faculty meetings that are open, that you exchange ideas, and feel free to exchange ideas. Your colleagues will not think that you're bragging, but rather they will be appreciative of you sharing a new tool and a new method. And last but not least, for students, next slide. Yeah, so it really takes two to tango, and in here I would ask students to be more helpful for the professors and TAs, because this is a whole new experience to us. Frank talked about the problem with projects and students' involvement. I think this is an area where students can really help. We had some students in my classes who really love to learn from their peers. I tried to do discussion forums. I tried to do open Zoom chats and Zoom meetings where I will intentionally not be around. But this culture needs to be, enhanced so that there will be a virtual life culture. I'm going to stop here because I spent some time trying to get my slides figured out, and then I'll leave the rest for questions. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Maji, for one wonderful, stimulating presentation with a lot of creativity into what you've been doing at UC Davis, and you and your colleagues. Congratulations. Wonderful.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah. So one thing that really struck me, it was earlier in your presentation when you talked about the assignment and the grading. And I think this is, as we all know as professors, this is one of the last things we want to deal with. And I really found it very interesting that you really thought about creating, replacing your midterm and final exam with shorter, module that are more self-contained, if I understand correctly. Would you care elaborating a little bit? Because I think it's very, very important because it distributes, the assignment over time. And I think at the end of the day, it may actually foster more learning than our traditional ways of teaching and learning when we were face-to-face.
Absolutely. Thanks, Michael, for the great question. Yes, that really helped a lot. So again, for my ESM 108 environmental monitoring, I divided it into 8 modules. I think the maximum grade was 15%. And then I restructured the entire course to accommodate that. There was one module about how you download and work with data from drones. And with that, I worked with a drone expert. We generated a full case study. We narrated a story, and then asked students to do a full set of exercise that was
described in step-by-step process. And that was completely an independent process, and that I think probably had like 15% of the grade. The electronics, I divided it into two components also. The basic electric circuitry and then how to set up an Arduino sensor. So yeah, dividing those into bits and pieces was very helpful. The students really appreciated it, and I could tell from a student towards the end of the quarter that all the knowledge taken or provided at the beginning was fully retained. And that's one thing that you start seeing students even sometimes forgetting by the end of the quarter. This was not the case, and knowledge was retained, and I think that was very helpful.
Yes, thank you so much. I think we're going to have to move on, right, for the sake of time. But
actually, because Dr. Majdi will have to step out in like 8 minutes. I think he has another commitment. So I'm just going to ask two questions that were coming in the chat box for Majdi before he leaves us.
Sure.
So well, everyone is saying that it's an excellent presentation and they really like the ideas you shared. There's one question about, so they say shipping test material to students is a very good idea, but what about tests with specialized equipment? What is your suggestion?
That is a major challenge, and the way we've been dealing with that. So I also have experiments that have or are using very specialized equipment. And what we're doing in that case is my TA or I will be going to the lab and we will be conducting the experiment. We have a tripod with a high resolution camera. We take the full video of our experiment and then edit it into a 5 to 10 minute shorter video that shows the step-by-step process. And then during the synchronous video or lab time, we meet with the students, we start with the video, and then we do interrupted stops where we say, okay, so at this point we did this because of that, so we started to inject some of the theory. And then we share with them data that we either collected fresh or data from previous years, and we ask them that they write a report out of that. So again, that's not the most ideal, but as much as possible, a zoomed transformation of what should have been a real life experience.
Great. One last question. So they're asking, where did you get the funding for the kits that you were shipping for the students?
That's also another great question. Our faculty allocated some funds for that, but I'll tell you, those are not very expensive material. So with costs in the U.S., I know things here are or could be more expensive. The entire shopping costed me around $1,500 or $2,000 for my entire class, and that was including lots of material that in retrospect I could have either made half of them or a big chunk that could have been given to only students who wanted to do those exercises. So you can do a little, you can do with a little bit, and you can do with different budgets.
Okay, can you stay for another question?
Absolutely.
Okay, so to what extent online learning can substitute experiential learning in career-oriented institutes?
Replace over the long term is probably a question that we have not yet started thinking about. There's nothing better than, you know, the real life experience, because I remember one nice word that Frank said, you need to see your professors in the eye and have this interaction with your colleagues, and technology is resolving a big part of this, but still the feel and the interaction is very helpful. But what I learned from this experience is there is much that the previous way of teaching was lacking. I now have videos that will be part of my teaching platform, and this will allow students who missed my lectures to still understand the material. It will allow students who attended my lecture but could not understand a tough concept to go back to those because those are now in my database. They are available, and this is the nudge that I was talking about. We had to stop things. We had to do things. I'm doing them in a way that I can use them permanently and not just until the pandemic is over.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Majdi, and thank you for joining our webinar. I know you have to step out, so thank you for making the time too early at 6 a.m. for you and being with us. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. And I will be watching the video for the other two speakers. I'm really sorry that I have to leave.
No worries. Okay, so now it's time to introduce our third panelist, Dr. Joy Jamago from the Central Mindanao University in the Philippines. Professor Jamago is a faculty member at the Department of Agronomy and Plant Breeding of the College of Agriculture of Central Mindanao University in the Philippines. She specialized in genetic and plant breeding and crop sciences. She acquired her BS and MS in plant genetics, resources conservation and management from the University of Philippines at Los Banos, and she received her PhD in science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in the U.S. She's a member of the CMU Press Advisory Board since 2007 and a member of the CMU Publication Board since 2013. She serves as crop science section editor at the CMU Journal of Science. In addition to her role at CMU, Dr. Jamago is a member of the Technical Working Group for Seed Production, Storage, and Distribution at the Philippines National Seed Industry since 2011. She will be presenting today the challenges faced and the need for changing learning gears due to the COVID-19 and the opportunities onwards. Dr. Joy, please, the floor is yours. You can share your screen and your presentation.
I will do that. Thank you, Rula. Yeah, it's kind of loading. Okay. I hope you can hear me well. Okay. I'm going to share that. Let me know if you can see the full screen, Rula. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, if you can put it in. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. No, that should be. Oh my God. Can I back up a little bit? That should be. That's the last slide. Oh shoot. Okay. Why do we always have this technical problems when we get started?
It's part of the online.
Yeah. Majdi was so correct. We always have trouble. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. Finally. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to follow after Frank and Majdi. I learned many things from your presentation, and it's good to follow after Dr. Majdi. So again, hello, everyone, and good evening from my side of the world, and good morning or good afternoon to all of you in the different time zones. And I'd like to thank Rula first and Jim for inviting me to be part of this webinar. And this will be my sharing for today. Changing learning gears to the COVID-19 and opportunities onward. This is the outline of my talk. Very short. We're supposed to only have 10 minutes. I will share a bit about the university and some traditions and challenges. And then the meat of this talk, which is changing games and changing gears for online learning. And then from the perspective of the faculty and for the students, and what are the opportunities for us as we go forward. So CMU is actually an old academe because it started as a primary school, and it is 68 years as a higher education institution. It's 55 years as a state university, and we have more than 3,000 hectares of land for various uses. And that's the reason why most laboratory classes are actually highly experiential, because we field students through research projects and production projects and many facilities in the university. We have 9 colleges in school, and the College of Ag is the biggest. Well, it's the oldest, and it's the biggest enrollment. And for the semester, we started in August. We have about 2,300 students enrolled in the college alone. And most of the students we have in the university are actually from farming families, and they don't pay tuition. So in 2015, the university had its golden anniversary as a university, and it launched a new vision, and that is to be a leading ASEAN university, actively committed to the total development of people for a globally sustainable environment and a humane society. It is important that you know about this before as I continue with my talk. So this semester, we had surveys to determine the basic readiness of our students for online learning. And from about 12,000 respondents, we learned that about 95% of them would be ready, and only 5% would be availing of the printed self-learning kits or modules. So we have some traditions and challenges. Most of the faculty are actually still very faculty-centered when it comes to teaching classes, and our instructional materials are still campus-based when it comes to equipment that we need, the resources that we need, and distance learning programs are still goals since 2011, so I can relate to Dr. Majdi earlier. And also for the faculty, whenever we do travel, both personal and official, it is always a must that we have makeup classes after. And another thing is that our students, graduate students, would often have their classes on weekends or off hours because many of them are actually working during weekdays. So those are challenges and traditions in the university. Added to that, we have a very tough workload. I wish I have only 2 subjects this sem. But basically, every faculty has a minimum requirement of 18 units per semester, and that would be equal to 6 to 9 classes per sem. On top of that, we need to mentor research students, both undergraduate and graduate. And if you're a professor, definitely you need to do research and do community engagements aside from quasi-functions. And if you have admin work, then you have fewer classes, but still you need to meet the minimum requirement per unit. So that's the background. Another is that in 2009, I was in Japan for more than a month for a leadership forum sponsored by the International Association for Traffic and Safety Sciences. And the most important takeaway I had from this forum was the principle of learning to share and sharing to learn. And I have applied and adapted this actually when I came back to the university. So before the pandemic, I have already used some online strategies for better learning of my students. And one of them, of course, was using Facebook because it's the most accessible for many students in the country. An example is for them to post their best meal for the day on FB for 21 straight days to develop a habit about food crop diversity. And this is actually an activity for my students in PGR conservation and utilization. And for research students, they always have to do an email interview of foreign scientists and researchers. So that's a very interesting experience for them. And another activity is a takeaway from TED Talks, and that would be the Aggie Talks for my students for about 6 to 8 minutes. And another thing is for them to critique and write short essays for every supplemental YouTube video that we would be using in class. And the ones below actually are non-online materials, but they have very good feedback from my students, and I cannot elaborate them because we don't have enough time. But actually, nothing beats the actual field work. So these are some of the students I hosted this January before the COVID pandemic. And they are students from the Philippine Science High School, and they told me that it was their first time to do field research work. And this is actually in one of the lakes in Bukidnon to monitor or get data for Oryza rufipogon, one of the wild relatives of Oryza sativa. So moving on, indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely shook traditional systems of many academe, but it also challenged us to be more creative, to be more imaginative, and to be more resourceful. It also reinforced our commitment to our profession, but also tested our resilience and mental health. But COVID-19 also motivated us to change learning gears for an academic evolution. I'm using that phrase. So how's the faculty changing their gears? I can share 3 for now. Definitely, we need to learn a lot of new skills, very quick and very fast. So we have learned, a lot of digital applications. I'm sorry about digital applications, creating online classrooms, making FB groups, group chats, and even vlogging and making YouTube channels. And I actually did vlogging and YouTube channels, and it was one of the scariest things I ever did in my life. So we have also become very familiar with these icons as tools for our online learning. And we have tapped colleagues and alums and friends and many other people as wonderful resources for making learning videos. Okay? And definitely, I think Frank was talking about it earlier. We had to really learn to be comfortable talking to monitors like this, because it's really different when we're face to face with your students. And I found early on that it's difficult to explain things when no one is, you don't have a pair of eyes, you communicate to students in a more intimate way. So quickly, I'm showing you the Google Classrooms that I had to prepare and create content this semester, and that's actually a lot. So how about the students? First is that they definitely, I believe, they are learning. They're learning that they need to beef up their skills to be more competent. Many are not used to doing email correspondence and presenting reports online, and they have to deal with a lot of real-life problems regarding online learning, and they're forced to read more, to think more, and to do independent learning on their own. And because for us, the online meetings are only for consultation most often, because internet access cannot be sustained for many students. So this is like a synchronous system that was shared by Frank earlier. And the second thing is that they deal with a bigger classroom. Of course, the internet and the communities that they belong to become now their classrooms. And so the classes are less structured, with less supervision, and with a lot of distraction. I even have family members who were waving at me during online classes, online meetings. And of course, I think they are more challenged to develop their values, especially honesty, discipline, and resourcefulness. And on top of all of these, we have a lot of issues, security issues. When on campus, I know that many students really don't eat healthy. So I assume that when they are back home, they would have better and proper meals. But apparently, this is not always the case. I don't want to elaborate on that. And definitely here in the Philippines, we have concerns on energy security and internet security. Power is gone with or without warning, and internet access is often slow and not sustained. Many of us would find ourselves talking to the computer, talking to the monitor, only to find out that we have been cut off by the internet several minutes ago. So that is really blooper, what we call blooper. But of course, financial security. Many students miss online meetings, even if you do it only once a week or once every 2 weeks. They cannot submit many requirements on time because of financial difficulties. So I am curious if for our participants, you also have these concerns, and if you could please rank these issues and share your rating or ranking in the chat box. And I think Michelle and Rula will share the data later on. Okay?
Yes, sure. Actually, it won't be too much ranking, but rather picking the primary concern, because it doesn't allow the ranking. So they are allowed to pick one primary concern for them.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Rula, for that. You made it better. Okay, so I'm moving to the next slide. I'm sharing with you now a concrete example of how I handle one class case for during the semester. So this is a class on ag research. And because of the many security issues we have, my approach actually now is more on facilitating distance learning rather than the actual online learning. And these are actually new laboratory activities that I have to really rush in preparing. And examples would be a survey of plant and crop resources in their homes and in their communities. And that is, of course, designed for them to have more curiosity and also to determine what resources we can use in later activities. Another activity would be for them to do, well, they did it already. They did farm visits and actual conversations with the farmers, and that is for them to be more aware of the concerns of farmers and also to identify possible researchable problems for their thesis. They did conversations with their local government officials, especially the chair of the Committee on Agriculture, for them to be aware of the priority programs in their own communities, and of course did assessment of agricultural strengths and weaknesses in terms of the agricultural sector for their own community. So I made it very local actually for them. And so I didn't have to worry about special equipment that need to be utilized, but still for them to understand the basic concepts in research that could help them prepare to do their final requirement for graduation. And below are still a lot of the activities that they have to do, but I will not elaborate on them anymore. Okay? And by the way, after every activity, we would have online meetings, and they would do a very short sharing online where they would share their most important takeaway for that activity. Okay, and for whatever activity I would facilitate with my students, this is always a thing that I do to ask them for feedback, okay, and for suggestions how we can improve any activity. Okay. And I usually do hashtags. I use a lot of hashtags for them because they are the millennials. So looking forward, these are the possible opportunities that could further change the game for my university and hopefully for other universities in the Philippines or maybe other parts of the world. Okay, because of our concerns, I believe that hybrid learning would be a good way to adapt when students are back on campus. We can have classroom-based and online learning approaches. That would give us, the faculty, adequate time to do research and community engagements. Remember, we have a very heavy workload per sem. That would give us a lot of time to catch up on reading, writing, and other scholarly work. And official travels and personal travels will be more relaxed because we don't have to worry about the burden of doing makeup classes after. And for the university, I believe that the IT and communication programs can help optimize the capabilities of faculty. Perhaps CMU could establish several green rooms or media rooms that would produce digital materials relevant for its core mandate, instruction, research, extension, production. And by then, the university could have a good database of digital resources that would be useful, whatever would be the situation. And there would be less frequency of weekend and off-hour classes for students. And finally, offering distance learning programs and online courses and establishing an open university system are now more feasible for us. So I believe that this could be the significant steps toward the university's vision and would also be substantial contribution to SDG 4, which is
Joe, for this very energetic and again very thoughtful and display of a lot of creativity and innovation. Clearly, right, we find ourselves in a completely different world, and I hope I'm not going to take you and the rest of our listeners too much into a tangent here or a surprise, but there were a few comments that you made that I'm going to focus on now, and it's the idea that as we move into this COVID and post-COVID educational world, there are opportunities for us to grab on to improve the quality of our mission of educating our students. And you mentioned a couple of times in the presentation about resilience and mental health. And you talk about maybe this is an opportunity to help students, being more honest, more resourceful, and take initiative. And so would you care elaborating on how you think what can we do to help build those skills in our students in the remote learning environment or the online learning environment?
Yeah, thank you for that. I was, of course, referring to what I presented would be from the perspective of both faculty and for the students also. But for the students, if you go back there, we definitely have a lot of challenges for our students. And it is, when it comes to cultivating their values, it's a lot of struggle. We just had our midterms this past week. And you know that it's an open book exam, but they could really do a lot of, initiatives on how to answer those things. And so it's a struggle between, because Frank was saying about, okay, we need to be very considerate of our students, but we also want them to cultivate their values. So it's a struggle. That's why it's a challenge for both the faculty in how to really reinforce these values and how the students could also cultivate these values within themselves.
Yes.
I missed the first part of your question, but that's about resilience even in values. And for mental health, I was sharing about our tough workload, and we had very little time to prepare. So for the faculty, rushing through things, we had to go through a lot of workshops and attending webinars from April up to June, and then even July, and then we start class in August. So, and then we have a lot of classes, 6 to 9 classes for the semester, and we have to convert that into online materials. And actually, we're still not done. So we are actually, it's a work in progress for every class.
Yes.
Okay. And for the students, they have to scramble, although they would say that they have the gadgets, they have access to the internet. But it's actually, it's difficult for them because we don't have energy security and internet security. Even in the university, they're just gone. So toughness, mental toughness, how to contact your students. You don't have, the internet would be gone immediately, and you're having class in the middle, it's gone. So you have to do a lot of things like call them, at least one student, to inform them that you're cut off, and you have to apologize to them because they're investing a lot of, time and energy. I tell you about many stories where students wherein they have to, I'm from the Philippines, and we don't have a lot of this good infrastructure. So,
yeah,
a lot of resilience needed.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and good luck with all this struggle. But I think we don't want to minimize their impact on what we and our students are doing. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's why you have to be very creative. No, you try to introduce the same concept when they are in campus, but to do it on a different way, to use their local resources. Where Majdi was, sending things to them, we were creating online videos on our own too. But for the students to access them, we don't even have a very strong website yet for the school. We don't have a lot of storage system. So we have to use YouTube channels in order to have our blogs, our videos, our recorded lectures. But we have to find a lot of creative ways in order to really supplement the learning of our students. So that's why even if with these difficulties, they need to have substantial learning still. And so a lot of things being done in campus, sharing of best practices, sharing of ideas, and tapping your colleagues to also be your resources for a lot of learning materials.
Yes. Thank you for being so brave and courageous. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to move on for the sake of time here. So we need to have our last speaker. So Rula or Martina will be introducing the last speaker.
Yeah. So the fourth and last panelist is Dr. Lori Snyder, who is an associate professor in the Crop and Soil Science Department in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at North Carolina State University. She's the North Carolina Youth Institute Director, which is a high school program to promote youth leadership to solve global food issues. Dr. Snyder's research focus is within the areas of international agriculture, seed physiology, and sustainable cropping systems. So Dr. Lori will be presenting today, developing and engaging teachable moments online in types of COVID-19. Please, Lori, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to present today. It's an honor to be a part of this panelist, and I'm very excited for all the new information that we're sharing and learning from each other, and I hope we can continue to be strong and be excited about being a teacher at this time of our world situation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'll begin my presentation. Okay. Excellent. Let's see. All right. So first, I'd just like to mention that communication is really critical. And, we have what I'm going to present today is actually a collective a presentation of different strategies that my faculty in our department have used in soil science and crop production and GIS, and of course my course, seed physiology. And then I have a few additional resources. I like to just, actually didn't create a poll question, but interested in those that are using Google Glass or considering that type of technology in your field. So the first one I like to just talk about, as I mentioned, communication is key. One of the first steps for me to connect to my students is really to offer this creative classroom experience, such as coffee talk or general news topics about the classroom content. And I create this to be more of a non-mandatory social gathering. And what I found in my course, even in seed physiology, every Wednesday at 4:30, I have non-mandatory coffee talk meetings, and everyone shows up, and it's just a very relaxed conversation. But I also, put in content related to the course that really creates this ambiance of like, hey, if I miss out on Wednesday's coffee talk, I'm going to be missing out on, just getting to know my classmates and feel like the feeling of being listened to and not feeling the pressure that you have to really like a test or a quiz. But those have been very beneficial. And that's not to say that I also do include or mention to them reminders such as like there's recorded class lectures online, and we do use the Zoom platform. But also what I've been trying to do is include short videos or with other interactive Q&As into these non-formal classroom settings for this COVID situation. What I'd like to share next is these adaptive strategies that our faculty have used in full science. And for example, one of our professors, Dr. Matt Rickard, basically when he saw the switch to online classes coming up, he said, I held a 6-hour intensive day at the Lake Wheeler Field Lab. And so what he did was he, obviously within the compliance of COVID health situation, he brought the students to the farm. They collected the photographs of all the soil samples that they needed for the whole semester. And then he put in quotes, now the class can cover various soil units as planned, and everyone has the same soil sample to feel and practice describing for a soil classification. So that was his strategy. And then he also went on to create different videos. And as we've heard from our previous panelists, they've also created YouTube or various videos that they integrate and can use now as, teachable moments in their future classes. So he creates these videos that create the more digestible pieces, regarding the students' Q&As, basically about the soil scientist and applied learning. So he included questions like, where should I look for certain soil characteristics? And then he could point to those specific videos. Or what should I do? What should I expect to see if you're in that situation in the field? And most importantly, why do you care? So like if you're putting like the emotion behind learning and how this is going to apply to you, it just seems to go a little bit further in the student's mindset of why it's important to them. And so I wanted to also just kind of show you, I won't actually play the videos for the sake of time, but his YouTube channel has at least, 4 different videos that he's put up, and he uses continuously some of this content. And you can see within a month, what students are, going back and reviewing the content. But also the most popular that he has is the alluvial soils. 1 month ago has 137 views. So he has, created these YouTube channels, not just one professor's example, but several other professors are starting to create these YouTube channels for their students. And so here's just one example of one of the students' feedback, Ben Rose. He said, one example, Dr. Rickard went out of his way to spend extra time with us that day at Lake Wheeler and attempt to cover such ground as possible. That experience was invaluable. And so, as much as students are missing this one-on-one contact directly with their professor, he did make that time available, in which actually our college did adapt something that we did this past fall. And I have another example of what we call boot camps within the College of Ag, where they bring out students within small, under 10, outside to have hands-on learning as much as they can during this boot camp kind of arena of tactile learning examples. And then another professor, Dr. Amy Johnson, who teaches crop science, she created, virtual field trips to private farms over 2.5 hours away to show the growers masterful cover cropping planning but also other professors like Dr. Michelle Schroeder-Moreno has done videos of the agroecology farm. And then what I thought was interesting, going back to what Amy did, she creates like a link, to the course content and using our online resources like the GIS mapping and geological maps in North Carolina, and then created and sent, or actually had the students go to their backyard and create like what they call the dirty kitchen, utilizing the household supplies for this lab. And she said, I wanted to look at settling rates and look at the geographic morphology across the state of North Carolina. And then she said, as we would normally analyze soil samples with lab instruments, but we did a home DIY version with mason jars to test the settling rates of soil. And then it's a lower tech, but it drives home the principle, especially when they're using soils from their own farm or their own backyard. So I think it's just, creating these teachable moments that are really, I think, probably even more valuable to the student over the course of COVID, because you're really getting to know and value your own learning strategies in your own environment. And so this was what I was speaking about before with the GIS boot camp. So this was actually this past fall. They brought in students to learn how to fly the drones one-on-one during the course of the day, and it was very intense. But they collected all the data they needed to in this, kind of classroom outside hands-on learning environment. And then they brought it back into the classroom, virtual classroom, for continuing to analyze that data. So Rob Austin did this boot camp. It was a full-day event for students to learn and experience the steps necessary to conduct and to fly the drone. They walked through the pre-flight setup, the flight planning, the FFA safety checks before collecting aerial photos of our Lake Wheeler turfgrass breeding field plots. And then the students later stitched those images together and create what they needed for their learning environment. So what the class that I've been teaching this past fall is actually seed physiology, graduate level course. And this past year was really going to be all in face-to-face and in the lab. So I was really a little upset because I obviously wanted to have that experience, but of course I find the strategy to overcome that, and that's, again, sending kits to the students' homes so they can work together. And I thought this was going to be quite a challenge, obviously, to do group projects, but it wasn't. We had a meeting beforehand, actually when they received all the packages, you go over with the content and what they had to do with each of these materials. They then met their group members online, and then they set up their experiments to facilitate their kind of structure of what they wanted to do together as a team. And so they were given some kind of mystery seeds, and they had to learn what was in their seed packet and pick countries and describe their growth requirements. And they actually found that to be probably the most interesting to kind of diversify their learning from an international perspective. And then they had to showcase and show their work regarding, pre and post 2 weeks, and then how it was different and why their experiments were different within their groups. And so that was very successful, and they enjoyed, they got really, really involved. They did more than they needed to do. I was like, wow, this is great. And so I sent home kits and how do you measure root mass and just very small procedures, but I felt it was very successful, and they wanted to do other experiments throughout the semester. And then, so I know, of course, of time wrapping it up, one thing I'm actually considering right now is looking into the technology of Google Glass. And this was a video used by one of our professors just shot outside of Williams Hall. And it's just very kind of, the picture that seems a little foggy or not so crisp on the file here, but it does actually, the video is better. And so one thing I'm considering is using Google Glass for just showing the techniques in the lab, and so students have more of a real feel that they're actually there for videotaping for next semester. And then in the process of creating this PowerPoint, I did come across this particular resource, Digital Options for Agricultural Teaching During the Worldwide COVID Lockdown. And I found it interesting because it did reveal the Ag MOOCs, and FAO has some great e-learning resources. But I also like to thank my colleague, Jennifer Howard, for writing a recent article on making virtual classroom work during COVID, and that was the examples I used with Matt Ricker and Amy Johnson during this presentation. But anyway, this is all that I have. I hope it's been useful. It's just real, like what we're doing, real life experiences here at NC State. So I'd like to turn that back over to Rula and our monitor, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Lori, for taking us through what you've been doing and some of your colleagues. And again, a lot of originality, creativity, innovation. The question that I have for you is, it was really nice to see how you've been able to engage your students at home by doing their own observation in the last example that you gave, which I think was your class. And again, it made me think and realize that maybe in the new world, that we are living in now, we have an opportunity to help our students to learn how to become learner. And I think you mentioned that a couple of times in your presentation. And, right, instead of having them just, remember a lot of information through our lectures, learning to be a learner, lifelong learning skills is something that we all aspire our students to become, right? Because this would be very, very powerful. So could you elaborate on that? How should we emphasize that?
I would totally agree that we should emphasize this perspective, because I'm not trying to, I want the students to be curious, and I also want them to show their strengths and their life experiences in the classroom. And so what do I mean by that? So, for example, I have one student taking my sea physiology classes in food science, and they're very much interested in food nutrition and related to the sea. And so instead of, for example, the third exam that I just gave the students, be it a closed book or per se, I know a lot of the testing strategies are all open book. I created more of like, how do you create a lab experiment? How would you relate it to your science and your world? And I'm creating that like open freedom, but also setting a rubric standard of like, what are my expectations of your writing skills or your scientific communication? And I think those are, in a way, I ask my students this question: do you feel like you're still learning compared to your other past, semesters in open book exams versus closed book exams? And they say that they feel that they're challenging themselves more than they ever have, because they are putting themselves up in a higher expectation. Well, this professor is not giving us a closed book, but it's open book, and I need to do even better because I want to be able to express myself and find the right resources and not limit my understanding, or I'm feeling more free, more vulnerable to maybe write or express this idea versus not expressing an idea because because it's based on my pattern of thought, my ability to back up my idea with a literature review. And so I think that in some way, I think we're doing our students more service by having probably more open book exams, because now they're exploring more resources. They're challenging themselves and not limiting their fear of getting something wrong. And I kind of feel like even if we had the perfect world and COVID wasn't around and we went back to more face-to-face classroom teaching, I think our students are going to want to expect us to obviously provide them with the resources we're doing, and even challenge them the way that we are challenging in ways that we wouldn't test them previously. And so hopefully I answered your question, but I do feel like it's creating more of an atmosphere for the freedom of expression, but also the freedom to challenge them, the students to challenge themselves in the ways that they think and in the way that they approach learning.
Right. Well, yes, definitely. Thank you so much. I think, and I know we are very short in time, but what a lot of the presentation, including yours, Lori, made me realize and think is the fact that our students are learning through interacting, right? Interacting with us, interacting with the content. And I think we have an opportunity here to rethink the modality of those interactions. And it's not that it's going to be better or worse, or it's going to be different. And we're going to learn as instructors how to maximize the learning through the student interacting in different ways in the future than we've had in the past.
Correct. Yes, definitely.
Thank you so much.
I think some of the questions in the chat as well.
Yeah, right. And I think this is what we're going to do next with the time that we have left. Some of the questions from the chat room. And I think Rula and Martina is going to take that on.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, everyone, for your presentation. So I know we're running over time, but there are some questions that if you can stick around for a few more minutes to answer some questions. So a question to all presenters, actually, what's in your opinion the biggest hindrance for faculty members to switch from traditional face-to-face teaching to an interactive and engaging online mode? What would be the biggest facilitating factor? I think that's like a global question, like, but if anyone would like to, Frank, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I think this is a really interesting question. And one of the things I just heard in the last presentation too made me think of, I think when you go to the whole online system, think of it what it can be that your class before couldn't be. So for example, maybe there's things you can do now you couldn't do before. So it's all a mindset. So the way I look at it is you have the same students, more or less, but the situation has changed. So you have to think about what worked really well for me before and why did that work? So in my case, I'm thinking it might have worked because we established a good community. So how can I establish a community online? Well, there's things I can do I couldn't do before. So for example, in my class, we used to take students to about 6 farms or 8 farms during a term. Well, now because of online learning, I have 48 farmers coming online next semester to talk to my students because it's easy. They can sign on and give a 15-minute snapshot of their farm. Couldn't do that before. So that's a really good thing. So I think it's all a mindset. You have to be positive and think about what you could do.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Anyone else would like to talk about the hindrance for faculty members to switch?
I know that a lot of our professors had a lot of anxiety to start off with, and and it's totally acceptable. I mean, how do you approach, teaching forage science and grasslands management when you have usually approached it through a tactile, demonstration? And so I think, based on what Frank just said, it's backing it up with new resources. And, yes, you do have to be creative and not be afraid to ask your other colleagues, well, what's working for you? And this is exactly why we're having this platform and this discussion is, showing what worked and what maybe didn't work and learning from each other and creating an environment and community to engage. So I really, that doesn't really answer all the questions, but it does in a way, because we are here to work together and to make things happen. So, well, that's how I would say.
Thank you, Lori. Actually, because since you are talking, let's take it from the student perspective. Actually, do you see any difference between the student effort in case of sophomore, junior versus senior classes? Which were more challenging to engage? Did you have any differences?
No, I actually didn't see any differences. I feel like at all levels, maybe it was just actually could be the class that I'm teaching, but maybe if anything, I would say maybe the senior, the one that's about to graduate, would probably be even more anxious to see how does this, how can I then take these resources I'm learning and apply it to my job and maybe answer different questions. But I think at all levels, all students participated and showed interest in learning. And I also made it so that if the students had a presentation to give and their internet wasn't working, I wouldn't hold that against them. And I know a lot of professors are really strict. You missed your time, you missed this. No, it's what are the alternatives if the student's internet is not functional? Or, we have a lot of rural students in North Carolina, and that is often my case. Even where I live, the internet will go out. So I always have to think of that alternative plan and just be caring and understanding. And I think a lot of us have come to, actually more closer together as a teaching world, and even with our students in that compassion and understanding and like I said, bringing us together for not so much of a strict, I'm a professor, student. We can learn from each other because the students have come up with ideas of how to communicate even more so, pre-recorded videos and sending it through even a message or a phone. So I try to be as lenient as possible to let students be leaders in their learning.
Yeah, I could share a little bit.
Thank you for the answers. We have run out of time, but there are just a few more questions, I think, for Frank, and then some more questions are coming up. But I would like to ask Frank, regarding the survey that you have presented, what did you do with it? I'm interested to know. Did you develop any recommendations for faculty members, and how were the results used?
Okay, so we did a seminar in the summer. We had about 50% of our faculty members attend it online. We also are writing a manuscript for the NACTA Journal, and I do a lot of conversations with faculty members about it, trying to give them advice on what to do. So that's how we did it. But we're also planning to redo the survey next semester to see how the fall semester went, to see if the results were any different. And so we'll be having that data hopefully by next March or April.
Okay. So that answers the second question. And then one more question, if you can please answer. So how effective, according to your experience, can learning be seen in terms of learning outcome in order not to lose the educational capital? So how effective can it be, like judging from the experience that you had with the survey, I assume?
Okay, so I think if I interpret the question correctly, is can you meet all the learning outcomes with online learning the same way without having to sacrifice anything? And I think that it could be a bit of a challenge, but it might just be different. So in my case, if a learning outcome we have is to really have students working together to produce something, maybe it won't be quite as big of a group. Maybe we'll adapt it to a small group of 2 or 3. We'll still have a presentation online. We may not be having the same kind of discussions, but we'll still have, it's just going to be different, but we'll still try and meet them all.
Okay, thank you, Frank.
Actually, I think, Joy, you wanted to comment on something, and before Martina took over, if you want to say any final words before we wrap.
Final words. No, it's actually okay, because I would just like to also second the idea of Frank and Lori. It's really about mind setting. And if a faculty resists change, this was the question on what's the biggest hindrance to a faculty. So if you are so hampered with how to transform your traditional materials, learning materials, into something new, so that would really be a hindrance. It would really be a bottleneck. But if you are excited, Majdi earlier presented the pattern of how you go through responding to the pandemic. And it's really about mind setting and being excited for the change, being excited and what would be new things that you can do for your students. Because, for example, you've been doing all these things almost routinely for how many semesters, and here is your chance to do something new, like doing videos, making videos, having a YouTube channel. So even if it's a little bit scary, these are new things that would really, overcome that bottleneck about mind setting. So that's just like, that's the thing that I could add.
Thank you so much, Joy, and thank you, everyone. I think it's time to wrap because we ran already over time. But before we close, Martina, did you want to say a couple words on behalf of APARI? We're not hearing you, Martina.
Yeah, thank you. Just very quickly. My internet connection. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Hello? Okay, good. Okay, sorry about it. I don't know what happened. It's like every time I have the webinar, something happens with my internet. It never happens otherwise. It's just like when there are webinars. So just as Joy shared. So I just want to thank all the presenters. We saw very interesting presentations. Frank was sharing his challenges and opportunities, and also like very interesting outcomes of the survey that he did with the students. And also like he included some ideas about like actually what students are demanding in terms of online experience. And Majdi, on the other hand, he was sharing his reflection, his frustration, and as well as experience with the online learning. which I think is very valuable to our participants. And Joy from the Philippines, she was sharing how her university is dealing with changing gears towards online learning. And she also actually shared some very important opportunities that we can and messages that we can also take home. And the last presenter, Lori, what she also showed us was the importance of having our own or developing our own learning strategies with students, which you all have. And with these messages and with this very brief summary, I would like to encourage our participants to write to us, to write to Raula, to myself, and to share what they are doing in terms of experiential learning, because all of you are being very creative and all of you have been kind of coping with the current situation in a very creative and innovative ways. So maybe you can be the next speakers for our next webinar. So please share with us these kind of experiences very briefly. We can have a brief chat on what you could perhaps present in the next webinar, because it's a very interesting topic, as we have seen also from the number of participants that joined today. But I would like to thank you, the speakers, the participants, and of course Raula for her excellent moderation. And I hope to see you again next time. Raula, back to you. And of course, sorry, Michelle, I forgot, of course. Very good moderation as well. Thank you.
So thank you, Martina. It's time to wrap close our webinar. So today we heard really interesting experiences of different universities that are facing these challenges about virtual learning. So just when you leave this webinar, there will be also a pop-up survey that you can take to let us know about other topics you will be interested to learn about and whether you would like to participate in future webinars. Thank you for the active participation in the chat box and the comments you sent and questions. Also, I would like to invite you to join our Facebook group on experiential learning. It's actually being moderated by experts in the field. I'm gonna post the link in the chat box here, so you can, and I will send also an invite by email to all of you to join this experiential learning Facebook group to engage and discuss with the other experts as well. As you know, we recorded this webinar, so I'll be sharing the recording later and we'll put it on our website. Finally, I would like to thank our panelists today, Dr. Frank, Dr. Majdi, Joy, and Lori. Thank you for all your valuable inputs. And of course, thank you, Michelle, for this excellent moderation of today's webinar. Martina, thank you so much. And thanks for Apari for helping organizing this and moderating today. I would also like to thank AUB IT team for the technical support. And if you have any feedback on this webinar, please let us know and encourage other colleagues to watch the recording once we send it and we place it on our website. Thank you, everyone. Thank you also, especially for the Philippines participants for staying. It's almost midnight over there, so thank you for staying up late and watching this webinar. And thank you, Joy, again. And have a nice evening. Good night. Have a nice day, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.